Hello and welcome everybody to Humanities 1302. I am going to be your professor this semester, Professor Riley Sullivan. Now, I would give my introduction here, but I'm going to save that for a separate video. But anyways, today what I wanted to cover in this overview video really is just talking about what humanities is, what we're going to be doing in this class this semester, and what really the expectations are for this course. Now, really quickly, the question for many of us is probably, what is humanities? What exactly are we going to be doing? Well, humanities, in accordance with just a definition that I got from the syllabus, is an academic discipline that studies human culture and society, including the values, beliefs, and expressions that shape the human experience. So essentially what we're going to be doing is studying various cultures, their societies, and how their beliefs, their values are going to impact their societies at any given moment in time. Now, this course, Humanities 1302, we are going to be covering a variety of cultures ranging from 1500 roughly, even a little bit before that in the 1400s, all the way up to our present day. Now, with that said, these are a lot of cultures that we will be discussing or potentially could discuss. And what many professors have done here at Lone Star is really narrowed that focus. So we're going to be focusing on a subtopic within the larger field of humanities. And the subtopic that I've decided to go with that we'll be focusing on is war and its impacts on society, and vice versa. Now, during the course of the semester, we're going to be talking about really 5 different eras and how these conflicts are going to impact the human experience. Now, as we talk about these conflicts, we're not going to approach them traditionally like you would in a history class where you focus on the big generals, on the battles, and so forth. What we're going to be looking at through these conflicts is how these conflicts impact society and vice versa, and how it impacts the human experience. We're really going to be focusing on a bottom-down approach to history to see what was the common experience for the average soldier fighting, whether it be in the medieval period, whether it be in the Napoleonic era, or whether it be in, say, World War II. And I'll talk more about the conflicts that we're going to be focusing on, but largely that's what we're going to be addressing. We're going to be talking about what those societies looked like prior to those individuals going into combat, and talk about how that impacts their views of warfare and then ultimately their experience out on the battlefield. And then as we end each unit, we'll talk about how their experience may impact their society whenever they do come back home, and we'll see if there were any major changes to their society as a result of those conflicts. Now, with that said, as we talk about this subject of war and society, we're going to be really diving into 5 different eras surrounding conflicts during this period. Many of them are going to be focusing around European conflicts as well as American conflicts, but we also have some that occur outside of that realm. Now, just to kind of give a brief overview of the eras that we'll be covering. Here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to first talk about really the closing days of the medieval period, focusing specifically on medieval England. And we're going to talk about the 100 Years' War and what society looked like as a result, or I shouldn't say as a result, prior to the 100 Years' War, and how it's going to be impacted by that conflict. And we're also going to be talking about, as I've already mentioned, the soldiers' experience during that conflict. Now, from there, moving on from the medieval period, the next period that we'll discuss in the weeks to come will then fast forward up to revolutionary France during the late 17 and early 1800s. We'll talk about really the rise of Napoleon, but seeing how that revolutionary spirit of that period impacts those individuals within European society at that time, and then ultimately impacts their experience out on the battlefield. And we'll talk about that as well later on in the semester. From there, we'll then shift our focus, after talking about really Europe for about 6 weeks, we'll shift our focus over to the United States and talk about the U.S. Civil War and how that conflict is going to greatly impact American society. And we'll be focusing on a number of groups within that war, both the Union and Confederate veterans of that conflict, but also focusing on African Americans and their experience during that conflict. Then, once we've covered the Civil War, we'll then go into the First World War as a part of our 4th unit of the semester and see how modern warfare really changes human perceptions towards conflict in general, to where it goes from this attitude that really going off to war was this ideal of promoting chivalry, that it was really this glorious affair, and how we start to see individuals, especially the lost generation, the group of literary writers after that conflict, begin to have a very different view on warfare. And then finally, for our final unit of the semester, we're then going to the Second World War. But rather than focusing on all the societies involved in the Second World War, we're going to be focusing on the Pacific War, specifically with the American and Japanese troops that fight out in that conflict, the societies that they come from, how that impacts their experience on the battlefield, and then ultimately how their experiences during that conflict impacts the foreseeable future. And so that's just a brief highlight of the topics that we'll be discussing here in Humanities 1302. And as we talk about each one of those groups, not only are we going to talk about their societies, but we're also going to talk about their religious beliefs, their political views, we're going to talk about their social structures and so forth to get a better understanding of how that impacts their particular experience within those various conflicts. Now, that's roughly what the semester looks like. Now I want to go into some other details for this semester, especially some of the accompanying materials that we're going to be reading along the way as we talk about each one of these particular affairs. So first I want to turn our attention to the required text for this semester. Now you probably could see it a lot easier whenever or if you get onto D2L and you're able to view the syllabus. But anyways, I do have the books with me, and I just wanted to quickly highlight each one of them and what they're going to be discussing and why they're relevant to us. Now, perhaps what we could consider the textbook, and I want to point out we don't have a universal textbook for this class. I've opted not to include one. But what we could consider as our main textbook that's really going to influence much of our discussion throughout the semester will be this first book that I'll show you all, that, The Face of Battle by John Keegan. Now, this is a very unique study, and a revolutionary study at that was published back in the 1970s. And the question is, why is it relevant for us? Well, it really gives us that human experience of those who fought out on various battlefields through some of the conflicts that we will be discussing. Now, the main conflicts that it does highlight that we'll be going into a lot of detail about in the coming weeks is Agincourt, which takes place during the medieval period, Waterloo, which is during the age of Napoleon, and lastly, the Somme during World War I. And what it really highlights is how warfare for the individual soldier changes over time, their perceptions of warfare changes over time, and it also talks about how their societal views impact their view on warfare as well. So it's just really the perfect book for our study of war and society. Now, what's awesome about this book is you can read it pretty slowly throughout the semester because there's only 3 major chapters that are going to be covering each one of those battles. And I'll talk about that within the course syllabus and highlight that in that overview video a little bit later on. But anyways, The Face of Battle, it is our first text that we'll be reading in the semester. And if you're wondering which textbook should I purchase first, it should be that one right away. Get that one ASAP because we're going to be diving into it come week 2. So make sure to get that ASAP. The next text that's required, and it's relatively short, we'll be covering materials during the U.S. Civil War. And it'll be the book For Cause and Comrades by James McPherson. Now, this is another great study that really highlights the individual experience of the soldiers who fought out in the battlefield, the societies that impacted them, and so forth. So this is another crucial text, and we'll be going over this as we get to the Civil War section. Next, and the final text that we have for the semester, this is actually going to be a little bit different from these 2 books. I didn't mention this a second ago, but these are written by 2 noteworthy historians. This final book is actually going to be a memoir, which is what we in the historical field consider a primary document, written by somebody who actually experienced that event. It'll be that of With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge. It's probably a little bit longer than the other 2 texts, not too much, but it's still relatively short, especially compared to other books. But anyways, this will cover materials pertaining to the Pacific War during World War II and what we'll discuss in our final unit this semester. Now, with that said, the question now that many of you probably have, now that we've gone over the text, is when are the book reviews going to be due? When are the, and if you've taken me for History 1302 or History 1301, when are the course essays going to be due? Well, for humanities, it's going to work a little bit different. We're not going to be writing a traditional book review or course essay, but rather we're going to be using these materials a lot, especially within our reflective journal entries. And I'll talk more about what those will look like, especially in that video, once again, that's going to cover the course syllabus. But anyways, I just wanted to give you all an introduction to the text, where they fall in with, and especially in regards to our materials. And I have to press it, make sure that you purchase these as soon as possible. Now, with that said, as we go throughout Humanities 1302, I do want y'all to take note that there are going to be other articles, there are going to be other documents that are going to be within the weekly shells that you're also going to be required to read. But luckily for you, those are going to be absolutely free. They'll either come through the library's database or through some website that you'll be able to find those easily for free. But anyways, I'll provide the links for those, and as we get to those, we'll talk about each one of those documents and what they show us about society at that particular moment in time. Now, there's going to be a range of other issues that we'll be addressing within this course. I've talked about how we'll be talking about society, war, and so forth, but we're also going to be talking a lot about literature. We're also going to be talking a lot about the arts and so forth. And we'll talk about how really they play a major role in how people view conflicts and also how they remember them. Once again, as we talk about the legacies of these various conflicts, we'll go into detail about that literature. But anyways, this is pretty much all I wanted to cover in this really introductory video to our humanities course. I'm very excited for this upcoming semester, and I hope all of you are as well. If you do have any questions at any point during the semester, whether it's over the materials, the reading materials, or if you just have a generic question about how to operate D2L, feel free to send me an email. All of my information is provided on D2L. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. Everybody be safe in the meantime. Make sure you go through this week's materials. Make sure you get this week's assignment submitted, the syllabus quiz as well as the first discussion board. But otherwise, in the meantime, be safe, and I'll see everybody out in the discussion board.